What we know about what you do, frankly, we get from movies and television. And the first thing that comes to mind is that there's always a couch. We have to lie down on the couch, and I know that's not true at all, of course. But what we see in the movies and TV is patients blaming somebody else or making a lot of excuses. Is that anything like real life situations?
Well, it's badly understood. Yes, you can be blaming, and that usually doesn't get you anywhere. Uh, the the more useful concept is that of uh, finding an explanation. So, for instance, uh, a young man comes into a therapist's office. He's 23 years old, has a terrible time establishing romantic relationships with women, has great friends who are women, but seizes up when he begins to realize that he's having a romantic feeling about a woman. So, he goes into therapy, and over time it is discovered that when he was very young, around the time he was about a year old, his mother fell into a deep depression that lasted until he was about 4. And during that time, a child is very, very relational. They're all about being around mom and dad, and mom is particularly important at that time. And they want to engage her. They want to talk to her. They want to have all sorts of interaction with her. And it can be hard to engage somebody who's in a deep depression. So if she is slow to respond or inconsistent in responding to the little boy, he can begin to feel that she's not interested. And then he will further conclude that that's because he's not interesting. Now, he's too little to think about the fact that mom's having a hard time. That doesn't enter his consciousness at all, because little ones self-reference everything. And if something is wrong, it has to be them doing something wrong. So eventually, in therapy, it comes out that this period of time in his life had a profound effect on how he felt about himself, and eventually it shows up as, this explains why he has such trouble engaging women in a romantic, age-appropriate romantic relationship, because now he's ready to become a mate rather than just a friend of some woman. So you can say that pointing to this period in his life where his mother was unresponsive is just an excuse, but where does that leave you? It leaves you with nothing. You're just supposed to get over it and move on, right? But he can't. However, if you see it as an explanation, it opens up the thinking process to, well, I had that feeling about myself that I wasn't interesting and nobody would want to be my friend, never mind my lover. I had that feeling when I was 2, but when I was 2, I was working with a 2-year-old brain. So now I'm 23. I know a lot about the world and myself and people that I didn't know when I was 2. And then that can open up what's different now. Like, what capabilities do I have that I did not have when I was 2 years old?
Let me just
So it
jump
enables,
in. Let me just jump in there. That
yeah,
at first I was thinking as you spoke that you're saying yes, it's his mother's fault, and
no,
we get blame and we go on from there, kind of thing, and that's kind of what TV tells us as well. But what you're saying, it just struck me. A 2-year-old can't understand that. A 23-year-old can now begin to address it, but it's not to seek the blame of the mother and then say, "Oh, I'm a good guy after all." There's a whole rebuilding process to take place. Then, is there not?
oh yeah. But it becomes possible when you're not looking at your experience, your young experience, as an excuse for your behavior now. When you're thinking about it as an excuse, that dead ends the thinking, conversation, anything. Nothing can happen. But if you're looking at it as an explanation, then it is possible to rethink the situation and bring your 23-year-old experience and capability and thinking processes to the table and work through this situation. Does that make sense?
It does, and it helps to explain something else to me, and that is this, and I may have this wrong completely, but the perception that we have is also from TV and movies is that therapists take an awful long time to solve the problem. And I guess when you point out an example where a 2-year-old was impacted and it impacts on a 23-year-old, we have to keep in mind there's 21 years have expired in between, so you're not going to solve it overnight.
That's right. That's right. And besides, the therapist isn't solving it. The client is solving it. The therapist is helping to establish a process in which the client can come to their own solutions. It's not for us to say how anyone should respond to the situations they find themselves in. It's for them to come up with the solutions, but we have to be the catalyst that gets the thinking process going and help to keep it going so that the client can work their way through and out of whatever situation that they don't like that they find themselves in. Does that clarify it a little?
Well, it sure does. And of course, I'm sitting here thinking about all the times I've had flaws in my life and wondered and worried and would kind of trace it back a little bit to somebody else's the fault or the beginning. And I recognize that, but I'm sitting here thinking to myself that, you know, if we don't grasp it ourselves, you can't tell us.
Exactly.
And if we don't grasp it ourselves, we can't dig our way out of it.
So this is what psychotherapists try to do is to sort of give the client a way to look at and think about their own experience, and help them understand that, you know, when you sort of blame somebody for your own troubles, I mean, there's that just doesn't take you anywhere. Like, what do? You just resent them, and then where are you? Where is the solution there?
It isn't, yeah. And is this kind of fundamental to everything you do? I mean, I've tried to understand before the multiplex of what you do with the issues and so on that you face, the problems that you try and unearth and reveal to your patients. And that is, everything from what I will call simple depression, and I'm not trying to undermine it or simplify it, but and ultimately to psychotic behavior. Is it all based on the conversation and the revelation of the truth or the beginning, so that the patient at whatever level of need comes to an understanding inside?
Well, that's how I work. That's not how every therapist works, but that's how I work. And it does have value in a lot of situations, but I don't want to try and say that this is the only way to do this. There are other therapeutic techniques that stay much more centered in the present. They don't always try to connect the dots back to the past, but I find that to be extremely useful, which is why that's how I work. And I have found in my practice that a lot of people are able to make those connections, and then that sort of gives them a way of moving forward that is more informed. And it also helps them understand that there's a lot of these situations are really no-fault situations. Like, a mother does not want to be depressed, right? She falls into a depression. Sometimes these are primarily biochemical. Sometimes they're for other reasons. But in that situation that I'm laying out, it's the mother is not at fault. She might dearly love her son, but is unable to move out of her own depth of despair in order to be responsive for a period of time in his life. She might feel very badly about that later on. But it certainly isn't the fault of a little boy to conclude that something's wrong with him. Youngsters do this all the time. It's a survival mechanism.
Now, I find it interesting. You're really talking about family dynamics, and one wonders then, when you come and unearth the problem, when you unearth the initial cause of the problem, how important is it for the other members of the family to work alongside? How important is it, and not so much for, in the case you've described, where the mother might still be around and can accept responsibility for being the trigger back in the day, but, when somebody's going through life with these burdens, how important is it for a spouse, for a parent, for a brother or a sister to be aware as well? Do they play a part in your treatment?
That's family therapy, which I personally do not do. I'm not trained in that.
Well, no, let me rephrase. Let me rephrase then. You have a client, and you've unearthed this situation. And if that young man still has a relationship with his mother, for example, do you bring her into the situation so that she can understand and help to play a role? What if she's upset with him for being the kind of guy that he's become, and she's, perhaps making the problem worse?
Well, it could be that when she came out of her depression, they had quite a good relationship. The thing that dominated his life was his early conclusion that he wasn't interesting, which had an impact on how he dealt with everybody that he met as he went through his life. So it may or may not be useful or helpful for somebody in their early 20s to be trying to pull mom back in. Maybe the relationship between him and his mother at that point in time is perfectly fine. It was a temporary thing, but as she came out of her depression, his view of himself had been established to a certain extent and was not changeable at that point. It is changeable in his adult life.
Interesting to note, interesting to note, too, that we've talked before about the fact that mental health is not entirely different from physical health. We've talked about people breaking a leg or whatever it might be. You go to the doctor, you might deal with a nurse practitioner, you might deal with a physiotherapist, you might deal with a pharmacy, all kinds of players in the game. And when it comes to something broken in the mind, there are doctors who can prescribe, and there are people like you who can work within. But when it comes to your kind of treatment, you can't put a splint on it. You can't do a transplant. You can't come up with the miracle cures and all that kind of stuff. So it simply takes time. You can't add physical components to fix a problem that's not physical in the first place.
The simple analogy between physical health and mental health is kind of limited because there are many more complex processes that have to do with the individual who's suffering from something, if I can put it that way. And they have much more capability to really participate in their own healing. It's a more limited when you're dealing with a purely physical situation. But there's a lot more autonomy on the part of the client or patient, if you will, and a lot more agency if they are looking at their own life. So, these things get so complicated so quickly. There are complexities with the emotional life that don't necessarily exist with the physical life. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.